Today's a minor update. I want to make another Death Stranding theory video. There hasn't been much that's changed, although I did want to do it in a different format, so I'm going to upload that soon. But I want to talk about certain updates. I know there was people submitting comments to me about the story of Death Stranding. I think what they didn't understand, what I was referring to with the last video, is that in Death Stranding, I don't think the story is related to what's really going to be happening. Since I already gave a theory of what I think is going on with the main plot of the story. There may be an underlying still plot that's based on what may be happening in the game. But how I envision this is that the game takes place when a video game that comes into full realization of the fact that it's a video game. So the story within that video game world becomes irrelevant to the real story of what is going on in the real world. So in that way, I do think that Silent Hills is still connected to Death Stranding. If the Konami thing turns out, I mean, if the breakup with Kojima is actually true, it just means that Death Stranding it is just another realization of the same game, only it's taking place in a different setting. Basically, because they can't touch that old IP. I mean, they can hint at it, is what I'm trying to say. So Silent Hills may not necessarily be dead. It may still be part of the game, but it's no longer called Silent Hills. It may be another section of the game where, let's say, the character enters a different world because he's able to do so because there's a realization that it's all a game, something based in someone's imagination. So by knowing this, there's other ideas that the person may be holding which can lead you to another world. So in that sense, Silent Hills would most likely still be alive. It just can't be called Silent Hills. However, there's still always the possibility that the whole Kojima Konami thing either didn't happen or happened with both of them agreeing to it. In other words, amicably. In which case, Konami is just working with Kojima on, and Kojima just created a new studios, and they still can. That new studio can work with Konami, in which case they could still be working on Silent Hills, just not as part of Konami. I doubt that. It's just too much has happened, and financially, that would just be kind of sneaky, and it just would kind of break trust in the whole company. It's still possible, given how it would be one of the best publicity stunts ever, especially for Konami that has a terrible reputation all of a sudden. That would probably improve the reputation if they just were faking it just for one creator who wanted to fake it. But I don't think they're gonna be doing that. That said, it still means that Silent Hills. I mean, it doesn't mean that Silent Hills can't be connected to Death Stranding, since although the game itself is not the same game, and they're not able to utilize all the things. It's like if, for instance, tomorrow, uh, Shigeru Miyamoto leaves Nintendo and he wants to make another Mario game. The way he would do that is by making a new IP, but making it very similar to Mario in a lot of ways, so that you just feel like you're playing Mario in a sense. You can still do that legally, although you may have to change some things around. It's just in the end, it's the same game. It's just not Mario game. The same way as Ukulele was trying to be Banjo Kazooie is what I mean. So that's always possible. They could have just left, and now they're creating a new IP. Although the video that the first trailer for Death Stranding looked nothing like Silent Hills, it's possible that the main character is able to be transported to other worlds. One of which is like a haunted house kind of world where he's dreaming and he's like or something, and he's like inside of a haunted house, like in Silent Hills, or the PG trailer was. In which case, it would still be the same thing. It would just be within a different setting for the beginning of it. But I do think both these games were hinting at the same concept of multiple dimensions. And I do believe the characters are able to go through those multiple dimensions. I just have a theory of what that means. The other point that I wanted to point out was that recently the only indication that we have that Silent Hills is still around is probably that new music video from t.a.t.u's member called Silent Hills. Uh if that I mean, the reason that would probably be a hint that it's related to Kojima is the fact that that old band t.a.t.u was really popular here in Japan for a while. I mean, they have a niche market, and like even recently, both members were in a Snickers commercial here. That was not even that long ago, like maybe 2 years ago. The thing is, they have a presence in Japan, so it's not out of the realm of disbelief to believe that Kojima would be interested in using them. And I'm pretty sure that for some this song, like everything about it, it just stands out. It has to be related to something with Kojima. It has to be related with actually Silent Hills. What this indicates is that I don't think Silent Hills is necessarily dead, and I don't know in what way or how they're doing this, but I don't know if it's because it's legitimately still alive as a project. It could be, and if it is, they probably like Kojima probably reached an agreement with Konami, or Konami, or they've always had this agreement, or the whole thing's a ruse. There never was a Kojima Productions, and there was a breakup. That's the least likely, I think. The more likely would be that there's two possibilities: either they reached an agreement, um, or they had an agreement already when they broke up, or the other possibility is that there is no Silent Hills. They're just doing this as a means of trolling or the Silent Hills name, since they're able to use it for some other things like songs and stuff. So they just go ahead and use it. But what it still means is that Death Stranding is somewhat Silent Hills, but it isn't. In my belief, it's. I do think Death Stranding is still the same kind of game as what Silent Hills is going to be. There's changes. There's probably settings changes and stuff like that, but it's still the same game. I do think Kojima didn't just throw away everything he worked on. I think he's just continuing it within a different studio. And I believe it's still focusing on the same themes. The theme itself, I really wish, like, I hope that it is Silent Hills, and I hope that Silent Hills was not canceled, and that we'll see PT come back sometime later. I really do hope for that because I believe the multiple dimensions thing works way better in a setting where it's horror as opposed to being within the setting of questionably horror and maybe not horror. But if you see those trailers, they all point to. I think they all point to the concept that you're not seeing. That what you're seeing is more of an interpretation of what's going on, and there's really not an underlying story as you would think it is. It's more like what I would have said in my last video, where basically you're seeing a character uh, becoming self-aware, or a video game character becoming self-aware in a world that would not be able, like in a world he's not able to do so. So in other words, he's awakening, and now he has life and all these other things, but he's still in a computer game. So what can you do from there? I think that's always been the concept. I think the concept has always been that it places you within that thought and within that world. Is your world also real, or is your world possibly also just some simulation? Do you really know? Can you really question it? What's going on? All those kinds of concepts are always available to you. And in that sense, I believe that way works way better within this a Silent Hills game, or a horror game, especially a Silent Hill game, because Silent Hill was always about a character's mental state. He entered Silent Hill because of his current mental state and his weakness to, or his mentality not allowing him to deal with what's going on. It's usually some psychological revelation, which I feel like if you, I know people didn't like, in my opinion, like I know people didn't like the Wii version of Silent Hill, the remake. I can't remember what it. Oh, Shattered Memories. People didn't like Shattered Memories, and personally, for me, I think that game kind of touched more on what kind of horror I do prefer because the whole thing was psychological. It put you in the in the mental state of what's going on with you. What are you seeing within the world, and what does this world mean to you? And I believe that worked really well. I know people don't like it. And I think they don't like it because of the Silent Hills name. But to be honest, I've never been such a huge fan of Silent Hills, where I the original Silent Hill series. So because it was one of my favorite games. It's just not. It's not like I would need this game to keep on with the same formula. I really enjoyed the Shattered Memories one, and in that sense, I believe Shattered Memories is one of my favorite games nowadays because I believe I believe it's it's an underrated game. It's definitely for me an underrated masterpiece because it touches so much on certain things and it leads to certain concepts and there's consequences to each of your actions. It could have played out a little bit better, but I know one of the main critiques of that game was that it didn't have like action scenes like where you didn't have a way to defend yourself with guns and stuff. But I think in the way it worked with the Wii remote, it was so hard to push off certain things unless you actually knew what you're doing and you can push them off real easily. It worked very well the way it was handled, and it really felt like a really nice experience. Like it was my favorite Wii experience completely. It was what I think that system should have kept doing games like that until they mastered those games. But that was the closest we got, and that is still my favorite Wii game, and it's still perhaps my favorite Silent Hill game that there is. And for that reason, I know people aren't. This is not a popular opinion at all. People would. I know people aren't going to agree with this, but that's what the way I see it. Like it was basically a psychological thing, and I think Silent Hills was going for that as well. I think they were doing it probably way better than that since Kojima is way more talented, I would say, than any of those people that wrote that game. But it still could have been much better. Like that, it's still touching all those psychological points, but it's also giving you another thing where it breaks into this current world constantly, and it does it. I think it was going to be a slow kind of burn into the fourth dimension, whereas most other Kojima games have some fourth dimension breaking segment. Where I think this one was slowly going to do it until the realization hits you. And I still think Death Stranding's aim is for that. That there's going to be some sort of realization over time that the world that you're playing in within the game is actually your world, and it's going to touch you in a certain way. And I think that is the main goal of both these games. But I don't know if Kojima's going to necessarily achieve it. But I do hope he does. And for me, again, like I was saying, Silent Hills or Silent Hill universe would have been one of the best ways to portray this, but it's not the only way. And horror still can still exist, even though it's not a Silent Hills name. Like you don't need the name. Like even Silent Hills was, in my opinion, a different game than, and it wouldn't have had anything to do with the previous Silent Hill games. So I don't see any difference for me whether this is called now Death Stranding or Silent Hills. Although I still prefer the name Silent Hills, I still prefer that it still remain within that kind of more horror based world than what we're seeing recently in these games. And I think both of them are still horror, but like there's certain differences that just it's not there. It's not really that horror that's really like scary. Although it could be anyways, because for all you know, he could the Norman Reedus' character can still reach into those kinds of worlds. Anyways, I'm going to return to my new format or my old format for Silent Hill specific game content since I'm just doing this real quick, and I'll try to break everything down more and more where I'm trying to figure out a specific story or I'm trying to analyze it better. But this was just a commentary that I'm trying to make real quick to put it out there since we basically got that song just now, and more stuff is basically breaking and leaking, and we can kind of see, we can kind of, uh, we can kind of trace the dots, and we can kind of figure out what's going on with this as it stands. It's just that we still lack some information to fully clearly understand it. There's not really any new trailers for this game or anything. There's just bits and information, and people may be just reading too much into them or stuff like that. I know people like I've gotten comments where it sounds like people may have a underlying story for everything. I think they all those stories are built from either things that Kojima said and things that have basically been read into too much. And in a sense, I don't think that's necessarily the main goal. I'm not really when I was trying to in my last video, I wasn't really trying to point out so much the story as what the main plot is of the game and what the main idea behind it will be. There's going to be a story, I'd say, but I think the story that you start off with in the game is not going to be the story that you end with. It's gonna change, and I think this is going to lead to the fourth world breaking event. Again, I'll do this in another video once I have more information. I did want to make another video, and I'm still working on it. It's just taking way longer to edit everything and put it so I can put it out. Which I started right after I finished that video and had to do more with the inspirations around what Kojima could be seeing and what could be happening with the game. So we'll see about that. If I can finish it, unless like the only reason I wouldn't be able to finish that video or upload it would be that the information changes so drastically that it's pointless. It doesn't add anything and it's completely wrong. But it seems that game's not going to come out until sometime in late 2018, I would say, at the earliest. So there's plenty of time to upload that or make it, and I will make that. Anyways, for now, this is the main commentary I have for this, and I will sign out. Thank you guys.